thank you for your talk. Kieran Howard from the Politics and the Pub Management Committee. I'll keep it brief, under 2 minutes. On Monday, the White House and Donald Trump's spokesman, Sean Spicer, declared the United States has identified potential preparations for another chemical weapons attack by the Syrian government, Assad's regime, that will result in the mass murder of innocent children, for which he, Assad, and his military will pay a heavy price. The Russians have condemned America's allegation as a cynical military provocation and fabrication. The United Nations ambassador, Nikki Haley, quickly joined in on Twitter, declaring that this predicted chemical attack will, quote, be blamed on Assad, but also on Russia and Iran who support him. My question, is the US and the Trump administration laying the groundwork for a disastrous proxy war against Iran in Syria and possibly beyond? And does this accord with John Pilger's view that now, quote, with Al-Qaeda among its allies and US armed coup masters secure in Cairo, the United States intends to crush the last independent states in the Middle East? Syria first, then Iran.
The Syrian army is saying that they see this as a green light being given to the Al-Qaeda groups by the White House, basically. Then they will follow up with another missile attack or some sort of attack. And of course, that's the air force that the Al-Qaeda groups have. It's the US, but it's also Israel, which has mounted more than 20 airstrikes on Syria.
We'll be here all night if we answer everyone separately. The answer to that is I don't know, but there's some sort of ridiculous points made there about Al-Qaeda. I mean, how is the US Al-Qaeda's air force when the US is only bombing Al-Qaeda and nobody else? I mean, apart from rebels sometimes. I mean, why are you talking in riddles like this? US coup makers in Cairo, I assume you know that the al-Sisi regime actively supports the Assad regime. In fact, it even sent pilots there to bomb Syrian people on behalf of Assad. I mean, I don't know why the question doesn't make sense. I've got a lot to say in response to Tim. I'd rather just keep my time for that.
Good evening, thank you. And I'm Joffrey Balchem. I'm from the Philippines, and 31 years ago when we were kicking out Marcos, the US mobilized the 7th Fleet to the Philippines, and I was prepared to fight them so that they would not interfere with what we were doing. And people were asking me at the time, so whose side are you on? And it was a painful question because I asked, who is on my side as an ordinary Filipino? And I asked that question, whose side are we? Probably an ordinary Syrian asks that question. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the ordinary Syrian? I was fortunate at the time that if we kicked out Marcos, we had a good alternative. At least I have 2 minutes. If we kick out Assad, do we have a better alternative? Right now, I'm sure many of you, because I support Duterte, if you remove Duterte, the way America wants to remove Duterte, is there a better alternative? Even Trump, I do not support Trump, but let me ask you, if you remove Trump, do you think there will be a better alternative? And who is on the side of the ordinary American at this point? Are we not being controlled, manipulated to take a shallow stance of a politics of taking sides? Sure, isn't it time that we as ordinary people find out the truths for ourselves rather than be pulled in the con of taking sides? Because we are fighting for change here. We are not here to take sides. We are here to fight for a better world. So if you think I'm going to take your side, I won't, because I want to build a better world.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, next question.
Brian Concannon, got a couple of questions. From all information I've researched, it's become quite obvious that Al-Qaeda ISIS is funded, armed by US, Israel, Saudi Arabia bloc. And it's a crime against humanity for these countries to get away with it. What really worries me now is they're bringing up these chemical weapons, bogus accusations again. The next one, that Macron's going to invade without anyone's help. Trump will obviously invade as well. So it's obvious another false flag chemical attack is on the cards. I believe the people should be out on the streets marching against this. No chemical weapon attack, false flags, thank you. Let the world know that we were awake to this, that we've had enough. My next question is, Tim,
He's still got time.
78 was the first terrorist bombing in Australia. You and another fellow were stitched up for it. I believe they didn't even do tests to see what sort of bomb was used, and there's still no one's been found guilty of it to this day. Is that right?
Let me just say that without going into any details, you can read my book, Take Two on that if you want, that having been a victim of a frame-up, I'm rather sensitive to false stories being told about other people in political frame-ups.
Just briefly, I mean, yeah, look, Tim was framed up by the by the Australia deep state on terrorism charges, and now everything's reversed. Tim supports a regime which locks up tens of thousands of people on trumped up bullshit terrorism charges, except that they torture them and kill them. They often torture them to death, which Tim didn't go through. And just like Tim was slandered as a terrorist, Tim now slanders everybody who he disagrees with as a terrorist and a jihadist, right? Even including Syrian refugees. And he talked something about Christians, including a Syrian Christian refugee we know very well here, who he called the lipstick jihadi. Okay, I mean, this is disgusting.
Good evening, everybody. My question to Tim. Do you know what the slogan for the Syrian army in Syria? There's several of them. I'll tell you one of them, which is the most known and everybody knows it, as a Syrian. The slogan for the Syrian army is, you either stay with the Assad or we're going to burn the country. The country. This is the style. This is the style of the Syrian government and the Syrian army, of how people get treated, of oppression to every single individual. I bet you there is not even a single Syrian will say yes to Bashar al-Assad if they are given a bit of a freedom. Okay? Now, maybe you will. Yeah, there's a few maybe here and there, but trust me, there is out of more than 90% of the Syrians, they don't want the Assad. There is. You said there are nobody in Syria support. Everybody in Syria supported Assad, but you forgot about the millions that they traveled because of the yes. You said there's a lot of millions of people have traveled the cities out of Syria to save their kids and children and the Assad out of the oppressions that the Assad have done. There is no option for the Syrian people except the removal of the Assad. There is no trusted source you have provided,
Okay, so
all independent. I trust the human
We'll
rights.
take the next question. We'll take the next question. Yeah. No.
I'll translate.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I try to speak English. I am Syrian. I used to live in Syria all my life till I became 36 years old. I fled from Daraya. My family fled from Hama, and my mom family fled from Idlib. Just want to, Mr. Tim, to tell us, because we were sleeping when we fled, tell us why we fled from Syria. We are about 1,000 maybe people. My family in Hama. I am from Daraya, in Daraya, and my mom family. Yes. In our life, because of relating to these photos, we used to go for this rally when we used to be in the school by the organization, Al-Bas organization, which all of us belong to it without our. It's not our decision. Just sign. You can shut up, please. Shut up. In Damascus, it's shame to put this photo because all people should to go to street. We know how they push these people to go to street. But in other city in country, you can push hundreds, thousands of people to go to say down Assad. But to say we need Assad, intelligence push you, and we know that it's my life. It's all my life. Assad, Hafiz Assad, 30 years in the authority. He finished when he died. For many times in election, no other one, just Hafiz al-Assad. And our slogan in the rally, my God, you should put Assad instead of you. That's really come from the Al-Ba'ath party. We raise up slogan, Assad, you should be instead of Allah, instead of God. I am a Syrian, not you. I am a Syrian, not you. This is
Okay.
our life. And I, even in the army, I served in army in Syria. When Bashar al-Assad first election, I was in the army. We pushed to get our blood and put okay for Bashar al-Assad. There's no other one, just him. But even him, we should put in our blood. That's it, thank you.
Okay, so next question. Comment. Okay.
Yeah, I think we've got to remember, which no one's really spoken about yet, why did the Syrian uprising, why did the Syrian revolution happen, and what was going on in the rest of the region? The Syrian revolution was part of a wave of similar uprisings which occurred right across the Arab region. We know the Arab Spring, and yet people want to treat this uprising as though somehow it was a totally different phenomenon to all of the others, which is utterly absurd. The Syrian revolution happened for the same reason as the Tunisian revolution, as the Egyptian revolution, as the uprisings in Bahrain, in Yemen, everywhere else. Uprisings of ordinary people, of the poor, against dictatorship. Uprisings demanding democracy. Uprisings demanding equality. Uprisings of the poor and workers and slum dwellers.
Stop interrupting.
Presumably these people also think the Egyptian revolution, the Bahraini revolution, the Tunisian revolution, was this the CIA? Was this Israel pulling the strings as well? Yeah, this is what they actually think. This is the lunatics on the other side of this debate, honestly. Millions of people rose up for a better world, and yet here we have supposed
Okay,
leftists.
stop. Can we have the question, please?
I'll finish my point. And yet here we have... Shh. And yet here we have supposed leftists, and of course leftists who are lining up with the far right all around the world. It's the same narrative deployed by the far right everywhere, that everyone in Syria who rose up against Assad is a terrorist, jihadist, and that's why they all support Assad as well. But this was a mass revolution of the poor right across the Arab world, which the left should have supported everywhere, and it's to their eternal shame that the kind of Stalinist conspiracy nuts
We've got to stop now.
Okay, I'm going to respond to the second gentleman from Daraya. I mean, I have no objection to most of what he said, basically. I think it's all probably, most of it quite true. There was one comment he made that was silly, I think, but basically your family fled war, fine. Yes, the Ba'ath Party was a one-party system, yes. Yes, you had to get bused to Bashar rallies, yeah. You know, actually I got bused to see the Queen when we were here too, you know, so busing people for rallies wasn't the only thing. But And yes, a lot of people were against the government and are still against the government. But they vote for Bashar. And you say they were all forced there. But you have a look at Lebanon. You look at Lebanon in 2014. Who was forcing all those peoples to block the streets of Beirut to vote in the presidential elections of 2014? You don't have an answer to that. You don't have an answer to that. They fled the war. Your family fled the war. People fled the war. When Turkey opened the border just recently for Ramadan to go back for Eid, did you see the people flocking back to their homes in Syria? They're going back to their homes. If the war stops, most of the people will go home. That's a simple thing. Now, getting on to Josh. On Josh's comment shows what we call the idiocy of the imperial left, basically. It was all the same. You know, the Arab Spring is a Western concept. You don't believe in history, huh? You think that Egypt is the same as Syria. You think that Tunisia is the same as Afghanistan. No, it isn't. You know, in Syria, the Syrians will tell you, we are not Afghanistan. We are not going to be Afghanistan, you know. They have a pluralist system. Yes, it's authoritarian. Yes, people hated the Mukhabarat. Now, they look a little bit better on the Mukhabarat because of your jihadist friends have created a big rationale for the Mukhabarat. Now, my friend from Daraya says, he said 2 weeks ago that there are no people left in Daraya. Did you say there's no people left in Daraya? You said there's no people left in Daraya. Here's the stats from the Syrian government. Yes, the terrible Syrian government. 165,000 people in Daraya, December last year. Syrian people still exist. Now, Josh doesn't think that matters because, here's a revolution that he hasn't been able to have any sort of revolution in this country, so he'll have it by proxy through people in another country, We'll fight to the last drop of blood of someone else's. That's the imperial left view. We'll fight to the last drop of someone else's blood.
Is it really possible that somebody from a left and progressive background talks about a free election in Syria? Talks about is it in a vicious, murderous dictatorship? Do we when yeah, in a vicious, murderous dictatorship? I mean, when the Pinochets and when the Mobutos and when some Moses and all the, when all kinds of other fascist tyrants held election circuses, what did left-wing, progressive-minded people say at those times? Didn't they say they were sham elections? Didn't they say that how can you have an election under a murderous dictatorship? It's a first for me. It's a first for me that someone from that background talks about an election in Syria as if it actually was a genuine thing. I mean, I can't believe it. Quite separate to the fact that the two people up against Assad were obviously people that were only appointed by the regime to be able to stand. And so, in other words, they were just Assad clones anyway. Quite separate to that, I mean, is the fact that, and quite separate to the fact that, you had to, as you were saying, put your bloody thumbprint so the next day at work they could see if you voted. Quite separate to all of that, how do you know that the bloody figures released mean anything? As far as I'm concerned, the State Ministry of Truth, right, in Orwellian terms, released a bunch of figures and said 88% voted for Assad. How do you know it wasn't 28%? Just because the state propaganda ministry releases a bunch of figures in a dictatorship. I actually cannot believe that anybody that talks about that in a serious way. That's beyond me.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that, or actually quite telling in many ways, that Tim Anderson can sort of just, with one sort of broad stroke, label the comrades over there from Syria and supposedly their friends and family as just plain and simple jihadists. We've heard this rhetoric before. It comes from the Australian government, actually. It comes from the Islamophobes, the people who started the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the people that you decried just before with Bush's strategy to sort of control the Middle East, etc. These are the same Islamophobes, and you share the exact same rhetoric as them because you are an Islamophobe, actually. The collective demands that were raised when people from Tunisia and their revolutionary wave swept through the Middle East, and the collective cry of the people want the downfall of the regime. When those same sentiments set in and soaked in to the consciousness of people in Syria, when they said, we will no longer live in the same way because there is a wave here, there is a potential for a progressive future, there is a potential for social justice, democracy, and dignity. It's people like this whose affections are with authoritarian governments.
Can you get to the end of your statement?
I definitely am. It's people like this whose affections ally with authoritarian governments, have such searing elitism and racism towards people, the masses of people in Syria, throughout the Middle East as well, who raise these collective demands, who try to change and transform their own circumstances, and this person somehow calls himself a part of the left, and at the same time, with the same strokes, goes and speaks at neo-Nazi conferences. It's an utter disgrace.
My name's Bill Keats. Question is to Tim Anderson. Now, Mike Karadjis, according to his account of affairs, said that the revolution basically started when the regime jailed 5 teenagers and killed one of them, and there are hundreds of thousands on the streets. Do you support that upsurge? Do you support that uprising? Do you agree with me that that uprising is progressive? And would you support that uprising if it took arms and smashed the Assad regime? Or are you an apologist for basically a brutal police state? Yes, it is really bad that bourgeois and reactionary movements have come to the fore in Syria in terms of the opposition to Assad, but basically these should be dealt with not by clamping down by a dictatorship, but by the revolutionaries themselves getting rid of these bourgeois forces. That's what I think.
I'm Mark from the Refugee Action Coalition and Solidarity. I've got a question for both of the panellists, but first...
Can we have some quiet, please?
I was just reading a report in Al Jazeera, which of course the Assad regime hates, which Saudi Arabia hates, which al-Sisi hates, because it did actually support some of the uprisings in the early years. And of course now Saudi Arabia wants it shut down and lines up with Assad in that process. But there was a report that Trump's new version of his Muslim ban is about to take effect today. And it applies to people from Syria, Iran, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen, and one other that escapes me. At the time when it was originally proposed, there were protests across the Arab world, but Bashar al-Assad actually said this only affects terrorists, not the Syrian people. He was alone amongst Arab so-called leaders to say that Trump's Muslim ban was okay. So Tim, number one, do you agree with him on that it's only Syrian terrorists trying to get to the US or Australia? Number two, Mike's already made reference to the so-called lipstick Wahhabi, who you smeared and defamed, a Christian refugee. You claim to speak for Christian Syrians, yet you claim that she's a lipstick Wahhabi. Why haven't you faced court for her claims of defamation against you? She has made them and you haven't even bothered to turn up. And my question to Mike, is, you know, much has been made by the Assadists of how somehow ISIS is a creation of the US. In some ways it is, because it grew out of Abu Ghraib prison after the US invasion. But why is it then that the first place that ISIS went in Syria was Raqqa, which was actually held by the rebels and by the opposition, and not to some Assad-held region of Syria?
I'm not going to respond to most of them were speeches really, but what Mark said, the personal attack that he was making was about people, let's say, that, including women, that back the Al-Qaeda groups. And I say Al-Qaeda groups because they said several times, folks, we are all Jabhat al-Nusra, you know. Up to 100 of those groups said, we are all Jabhat al-Nusra. It's not me saying it, they said it themselves. The reason why I criticise people who say that is because they would never live with those groups. They would never put a bag over their head. They would never stop doing the things that they do as artists, as Christians here. There's no church in Saudi Arabia, you know. We know what their ideology is. The people that support and say this is the people in those Al-Qaeda groups are the civilians being killed by the Assad regime. That's what's happening. They're saying the same thing that the US is saying. But to defend those groups and to allow them to legitimise their attacks on Syrian civilians every day is terrible hypocrisy when they're political people. You know, in their political people, they expose themselves to that sort of criticism. And if it's factual criticism, it's justified as far as I'm concerned.
Tim calls everybody fighting the fascist regime Al-Qaeda groups. I mean, this is pure Islamophobia. This is what Tim Anderson's entire discourse is exactly the same as Zionist discourse. It's total Islamophobia to call everybody fighting Assad, or every group, hundreds of groups, Al-Qaeda groups. It's rubbish. It is rubbish. It's Islam. It's Zionist-style discourse. It's Hasbara. It's the discourse of Trump. It's the discourse of the alt-right, and that's why And that's why Tim can go and speak at a national action conference with all kinds of far righters. That's why his friend Mimi Partisan Girl can go on our Ku Klux Klan TV to speak. Yeah, she did. Well, she did. You want to see it? Ku Klux Klan TV. Because it's not because they're just going out of their way to speak to someone different. It's because this is their politics, right? That's why Paul Antonopoulos, who went to Tim's conference, was outed as a Nazi, as an actual Nazi. This is the people they're hanging out with. That's why every far right group in Europe and the United States is with Assad. Is part of you. Is part of you. Now the question is, the question was, did the US create ISIS? Of course, in a certain sense, the US created ISIS by invading Iraq. On that, we're all in agreement. Not because they went in there and created ISIS. They went in there and destroyed the entire Iraqi social fabric. And yes, ISIS came about as a result of that, as one of the resistance groups against US imperialism, but the most sectarian one. And then, why did they get so many weapons? Tim said ISIS, they found that ISIS had American weapons. Of course they got American weapons. They took over Mosul from the US and Iranian-backed Iraqi army, the Iraqi government, which is a US-Iranian joint venture. They ran away from Mosul, and ISIS got so many advanced weapons from Mosul, enough to equip several divisions of a conventional army with 10 to 20,000 troops each. That's how many weapons they got from Mosul. And then these people are talking about, maybe they'll get weapons from the FSA. Absolute nonsense.
I have a few questions. The first thing is the repetition of the statement that the Americans created ISIS. What a fantasy. What an absolute fantasy. The leaders of ISIS were in Assadi jails. They were in prisons. Assad released them. Shut up, you losers. None of you know anything about Syria. They were in, Chair.
Okay, stop.
They were in.
Let him ask the question without being interrupted.
Okay, Tim Anderson and Mike Karadjis, could you confirm for me the well-known fact that many of the leaders of ISIS were actually in Assad's jails and they were released by Assad in order to corrupt the revolution?
Okay.
Okay, that's one question.
No,
that's
it.
No, that's bullshit.
That's it.
Let me just respond to two things, not everything. The first thing is from Michael about Al-Qaeda, or sharing platforms. Now, Michael is on record as saying that he thinks the rank and file of Jabhat al-Nusra, that's Al-Qaeda in Syria, are decent revolutionaries. And if the US didn't give better weapons to the Free Army, he would support an invasion by Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So if I share a platform with someone like that, who wouldn't I share a platform with? I talk to everyone, basically, and I don't care if there's right or left-wing people in the audience. Now, responding to your question, you want me to respond to your question? You know who created ISIS? ISIS was created in Iraq, right? It was created in Iraq in 2006 by Saudi Arabia under US directions. And a lot of the leaders came out of Guantanamo Bay. They came out of Guantanamo Bay, my friend. It was created well before 2011. So read a bit of history.
Tim started to say the rank and file of Jabhat al-Nusra. I said many. Many of the rank and file are quite simply it's not even controversial, quite frankly. It's been written about and researched for years that that's the words, many of the rank and file are simply Free Syrian Army people who didn't have weapons and they went over to the group with better weapons. They had no ideological commitment to Jabhat al-Nusra. It's a well-known fact. And in fact, for anybody here who's a supporter of the Kurdish YPG, okay, so go the Kurds. Okay, so let's say go the Kurds. Now, do you know who the main Free Syrian Army ally of the Kurds are in Raqqa? They're the Raqqa Revolutionaries Brigade. But do you know that for 8 months the Raqqa Revolutionaries Brigade was the Raqqa branch of Jabhat al-Nusra? Because it wasn't. Because the whole FSA branch there, because of the threat of ISIS, because ISIS had much better weapons and Nusra had better weapons than them, they did entryism into the... No, US supply weapons to ISIS, ridiculous. All right, okay, so they joined Nusra. Then this Nusra at the beginning of 2014, when the FSA drove ISIS out of the whole of Western Syria, they even briefly took over Raqqa, but it was Nusra that took over Raqqa, drove out ISIS and liberated the Christian churches and ripped down the black spires that ISIS had put on the churches. And why? Because that Jabhat al-Nusra was full of FSA people, right? It's simply not even controversial. That is not an apology for Jabhat al-Nusra. That's saying that a lot of people have joined it because of the lack of resources and not dedicated to it. And the FSA has been fighting Nusra for years. And even over the last year, we've seen fantastic resistance to Nusra in Idlib, in Aleppo, in Damascus. There's been continual civil resistance to Nusra and resistance by organisations like the FSA Division 13 that holds towns in Idlib and resisting Nusra. I mean, we are opposed to Nusra. Right, and to rip me out of context like that is just typical ridiculous talk.
My question is to Michael. There's an old saying by Marx that history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce. In saying that, you cannot deny that there is a historical precedence to both the ideological and the political content of the opposition to the Syrian state in this so-called civil war. In Afghanistan, similar forces managed to overthrow the Taliban government. Managed to overthrow the Afghan government in 1992, paving way for the Taliban. This happened. Eventually paving the way for the Taliban, who would drag women kicking and screaming into football stadiums, dressed from head to toe in burqas, to be shot in the head or stoned to death for adultery. Whereas before the Soviet-backed government was overthrown, women were 40% of all doctors and 60% of all teachers at Kabul University. Similarly, and more recently in Libya, those referred to as revolutionaries actually called themselves names like the Brigade for the Purging of the Slaves of Black Sin, and after overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi's government, they carried out horrific massacres against black Libyan population who today are being traded on slave markets. Given this history, what makes you think the consequences of the Syrian government being overthrown would lead to any better or more democratic outcome than these historical instances?
Okay.
And if you don't think this will, then why do you support the toppling of the Assad government?
Okay, so let's be honest. A lot of people in this room have already made up their mind on Syria. I haven't. But I'm going to ask a question because I think I want to know the economic sanctions on Syria, which Australia is directly complicit in, and is contributing to right now, is said to be punishing the Syrian government, but it's actually not. It's raising inflation in Syria and leading to the rise in commodity prices, which is starving Syrians to death. That's okay now. We are complicit in that as Australians. So I want to know if the speakers here oppose the economic sanctions, because the worst thing that could happen, especially for the people here who aren't in factions tonight, is to walk away thinking that there's no good side. Because we have a choice as to what we do about this situation. We oppose our government's actions.
I'd like to speak a little bit about Syria and thank everyone coming here tonight. It's really honored to see all these people are come for Syria, for Syrian people, despite that they are now divided now, but you are coming for Syria. And my message to everyone is the only way Syria will change to a better country is when people like you guys work together, because politicians, they don't care about Syria, okay? They don't care about Syria. Politicians, they don't care about Syria. The only way that Syria can become a better country is when people like you work together. Because Syrians, actually, they've done something really good to this humanity. They create, with all this region, the alphabetic. They are, before that, they are hunters, and they learn them how to do agriculture. If you are vegetarian, you need to thank Syrian, okay? Because Syrians, they've done a lot to human. And we are all together. We should work together to stop this war. It's not about regime or oppositions. Personally, I hate both of them because they are all rubbish. Seriously. They care about themselves. They care about their power. We are here, guys. Please, work for peace. Work and spread this message to everyone. 100,000 people are dying everywhere from both parties. Because of what? Because of power? Please spread the message. The message is we want peace. Okay? Thank you, everyone.
I think that's a good one too. I think we're gonna end on that. I think that's a good point to end on. And right. So I just want to thank you all for coming tonight. Do you want to answer the other ones? Have you got something that you wanted to add to it? No. So would you like to sum up? Okay, so I think we might finish there because it's nearly... Okay, so I do want to make some announcements. One very important thing that is happening is that the state government wants to privatise our bus services. So I think we can all agree on this one, that we don't want this to happen. So can I have your attention? This is very, very important. I'm not going to be able to do that one. So this one is really important. So if you want to help out on next Wednesday, 5th of July, between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., particularly in the inner west, you need to contact www.don'tsellourbuses.org.au and put yourselves down as a volunteer to be at the bus stops to gather petitions that are going to then be sent in to the state government. So the next one I want to announce is happening this Saturday. Give migrants a fair go for citizenship. This is a meeting that's going to be held, a protest that's going to be held at Town Hall. 483 George Street, CBD, starts at 2 p.m. One of the speakers, Tony Burke, David Shoebridge, Peter Dukas, Ian Rental, and Rita Malila. So the last one I'm going to announce is a solidarity with Venezuela's revolution against right-wing attacks. US hands off Venezuela. Saturday, July the 8th, 2 p.m, MUA Auditorium, 365 Sussex Street, Sydney. Okay, so our politics in the pub next week, and it would be great if you all came along to that as well. It'd be really wonderful if we saw you all for the next one, which is Human Rights Priorities for 2017 and Beyond. Elaine Pearson, Director of Human Rights Watch, Emily Howie, Director of Human Rights Law Centre. So please come along. It's been a fantastic night, and I hope something has been achieved by this meeting. I'm not sure whether there has been, but okay. Thank you, and thanks to the speakers.